Hello everyone, it's Connor from the Glass Elevator YouTube channel. In my last video, someone asked a pretty good question. They were wondering why I can't just straighten this and then don't even worry about the engine or anything, just straighten it and put everything back together. And I'll give you a better look at it. It gets a lot worse at the bottom. It's very kinked. You may have seen someone else on YouTube cut frame rails off, take them apart, and then hammer out the metal till it's flat and then weld this piece back on. And that is so dangerous because he's only making things cosmetically better, but not structurally better at all. This frame rail is made out of high strength steel, and this damage caused work hardening of the metal, so now it's more brittle. So if I were to straighten this, it will crack, especially like on this line here, and it could even crack on this. So what will happen in a minor collision, if it's over here again, this whole thing will just shear in this area, and the car would probably enter into this area and destroy all this, and this would mess up airbag timing. So by correctly replacing this area, I'll be able to restore the factory safety rating of this vehicle. Before I cut and weld on the new frame rail, I need to make sure the rest of the frame is exactly where it should be. I printed out the upper body dimensions of this vehicle. It's 1,483 millimeters from this point to here. I'm setting up my tram gauge. I have my measuring tape on the outside of that post, and it's going to the inside of this post, so I know the distance between the center of these two posts is exactly 1,483 millimeters. The other cross dimension is also okay. I won't show all the measurements because there's a lot, but I can check the distance between this stud bolt to this one here. You see it says 575 to the center line of the vehicle, and if I add 575 to 575, it's 1,150. So I set my tram gauge up to 1,150, and I take the tram gauge, put that on one stud, and put that on the other. It's hard to do this with the one hand, but it's in the middle of that stud, and it's exactly in the middle of this other stud. I can set up the center line based on these two measurements here. They show between these stud bolts 575 millimeters. So I have this self-leveling laser line going, and here it is. You can see how at the bottom it goes right through the middle of that bolt and through the middle of that hole too. And I have my tape measure right on the middle of that, and it shows 575 right there. And I'll flip this around, and measuring from the center of this bolt on this side, it's also 575. So I printed off the information for sectioning. They call this part the side member, and this is the inside of the side member, and they want you to measure from this point 250 millimeters, and that's your cut line. So that point is right here, and 250 millimeters, I drew a temporary line, and it's far enough away from the damage. It doesn't look like there's any damage to the metal over here, so I can cut that there. And for the outside of the side member, there's another point, 360 millimeters, and that's the cut line. I didn't draw a line, but the cut line's going to be about here. And when I cut this piece off, I have to be careful not to cut all the way through because there's a piece on the inside. But they want me to remove this part of the apron. It's all of this front part. And I considered if there's like a way I could take off some of it and not all of it, but the cut line's going to be here, and there's about this much metal left that I have to cut and also be able to weld, and all of this is in the way. Okay, so I'm going to remove this whole panel, and I'm going to start by removing all of this seam sealer because there's some welds that I have to drill out underneath of them. So I'm having trouble removing this piece. The only way it can come out is this way. But I can't slide it this way because this thick piece of metal bends over this motor mount, and yeah, I can't push it forward because of that. So what I'll do is drill out this motor mount and it'll come out this way, and then this panel can come out this way. Alright, this piece is off. Now the next step is to measure and cut the frame rail exactly where the manufacturer wants it to be cut. It's 250 millimeters from that point, which is right here. And then on the outer part, 360 millimeters. It's a little weird though, because this cut is not exactly where this cut is. And I thought maybe it only works for this frame rail, but when I did the measurements on this, it also had the exact same staggered cut. And then in the directions, it tells you you need to drill out these spot welds. You can even see this is the back side of this piece. And on this page, you can see how the sizes are different. So this is just how they want it done. And I think it's a pretty good idea to have this staggered sort of cut because I think it would make it stronger. I was also doing some underbody measurements. This frame rail is totally where it should be. I did a diagonal from here and measured the distance, and the distances between these two are okay too. The only thing I didn't check is the height of this panel. It could be too low or too high, but I'm going to do that at the same time when I weld this one on. Alright, this is probably the midpoint of the project. The car is pretty much as disassembled as it's going to be. This part of the frame rail was all curled up inside this kinked part of the frame rail, so it was hard to get this end off. The only part where I messed up is this is split here, and I wasn't supposed to cut through to this. But when you're cutting through these layers, you really can't see the two layers. They sort of merge together like this area right in the middle. So I'm going to have to weld this on the inside back together before I put the other piece on. And also it is supposed to have this curved shape here. I guess this for the wheel. So now I have to cut the new frame rail. So yeah, let me cut the next piece. In this massive box over here, they gave me the assembly for the frame rail. This part came from the Kia factory. Sadly, I'm only going to use this front part. When I cut this piece off, I cut it all the way through, so I've welded up and I've ground off the welds. I'm going to spray some primer to protect this inside. This is the diagram of the front of the car. I'm measuring from this point, 1400 millimeters, to this point here. The new frame rail is in perfect alignment with the vehicle. I checked all of the measurements on the front of the car here, not just the ones that I showed on camera. And I would set the tram gauge up to any of these numbers and put it under the car, and it worked both ways, diagonally and just every possible way, as well as the upper body dimensions, which are on a different paper. I spent about 3 hours aligning this. It was really just trial and error. I would move it just a tiny bit, and then I would have to set up the tram gauge and get under the car and measure it like 6 different times. So that's why it took so long. And I also put this front core support on just to be sure that the bolt holes line up. I'm going to do one last thing. I'm going to look at the height of both of the rails. If they're not the same height, that would be very surprising to me. Okay, I set up the car so it's perfectly level. I'll show you. In the diagram, these bolts were used as measuring points. It's on the ground and it's 371. And on the other side, it's also 371. And the floor in this area is level. I set up my laser level, I turn it on, and I set the beam up to line exactly with the bottom of this oval. And on the other side, it's exactly on the bottom. So now I'm 100% confident that this rail is exactly where it should be. I'm going to go ahead and weld it. I just finished welding. The welds turned out pretty good, especially some of these plug welds are really nice. Here's the other side. I think this area right here turned out really well. I'll grind off all the welds, and if there are any little places that I missed, I'll fill those back in, and then we can move on to the next piece. I ground down all the welds and I welded some minor touch-ups, and I like how it turned out. So I'm going to spray some acid edge primer over the bare metal, and I'm going to fit up this last piece. That slid on pretty easily. I can still see the Sharpie mark and the scribe that I outlined this part with. I've already lined it up to that, and now I can start welding. I welded this piece on and I'm happy with it. This motor mount here, it has 3 bolts and it has a little bit of adjustment. This piece here fits in perfectly and the motor mount lines up, so I'm going to go ahead and weld it. The factory had a weld bead that went right here, so I'll put that back in. There's also another one on the back side here, and then there's another bead that just went there, but not on the back side. I finished welding and grinding and I like how it turned out, so I'm going to scuff this panel so I can paint it black to match the rest of the underside. Okay, I got it all masked up and I've got my paint booth thing set up, so it's time to spray. Okay, it's painted black now. I used primer sealer. Now I need to put some seam sealer back where there was seam sealer before. One thing I noticed with the factory seam sealer is that it's the exact same width pretty much all the way around. So I'm going to put some masking tape down, and when I pull it up, it'll leave this clean line. and that should help me get the factory sort of look back. Okay, this didn't turn out well at all. I saw a video of how this is made, and it's actually done in a zigzag, and then when you pull off the tape, then that's what makes this sort of U-shaped design on it. At first, I think that's what I was doing, but I had no idea because I didn't watch the video on it, so I thought maybe I could smooth it out and then sort of create a pattern in it, but it just doesn't really work that way. But anyways, I'm gonna pull off the tape before it's too dry because it's already really almost done drying, and then I'm gonna paint it, and I can just come back to this later. I pulled off the tape and it looks a little better, but I can always come back to that. The last thing I want to do to this repair area is spray clear coat. The reason is because it used to have clear coat, and the clear coat will just provide some extra protection for the underside of the car. Here it is, all nice and glossy. It's a good thing I didn't worry about this because after spraying the clear coat over top of it, it started to, I don't know, kind of bubble up, I guess. And it's kind of a rough texture, so even if I had it perfect when I applied it, it would have gotten messed up by the clear coat anyways. And I realized I'm not done yet because I still need to, I forgot to seam seal this part on the bottom, and then I need to spray rubberized undercoating in this area. Because this is getting covered up by undercoat, I'm not going to do a crazy good job. Okay, now I'm going to spray rubberized undercoating. And that's it for this video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next one.